Okay, I think we're going to get started here. People join in, that's okay. But hi, welcome everyone. My name is Sharon Redman, and I am a special education teacher and an assistive technology specialist. I've been in the field for close to over 20 years now. Started as a childhood special education teacher and have done everything from an assistive technology specialist to a district to teaching general education overseas to special education overseas here in Washington State and also in Wisconsin. So I've kind of been all over the place, done lots of different things, but I've always been in the K-12 environment. So currently I am teaching in the Port Townsend School District, helping with and teaching their more significantly impacted students at the elementary level, and also providing assistive technology and AT services to students in the school. So you're here with us today. We're going to be talking about positive behavioral supports and visual supports for the whole class, and really how can we do these visual supports and continue to add these things when we're even virtual. I'm very fortunate. We are in person here, and I get to see my kids every week. So we do a cohort, AB cohort schedule, and then also get to bring them in for extra support services. So I'm very fortunate that I get to see them. I do have a couple of kids that are virtual only. And so then I need to also prepare them in materials for them and working with them online. So I'm kind of doing both at right now. So what's nice about having them here with me in school is that we get to work on how to interact in a virtual environment. And so that's been a real positive piece to this puzzle of being in the times of COVID. But welcome. I presented this webinar last year and I changed this a little bit, changed it up. And so if you are back with us, so welcome. Hopefully you'll learn something new. And if it's your first time, then hopefully you'll learn something new. All right, here we go. All right, so this was me. I'm just talking about who I was, small kids or small schools around the world. And really, I like to take a student first approach and with kids. All right, let's see here. Okay. So as we go through this, so kind of what to think about, I think it's really helpful as you're going through this webinar and you go through webinars is we think about the students that we have and that maybe some issues that we're coming up with and we're not really sure how to problem solve that. So that if you kind of come up with this idea of thinking about getting one student in your head, or maybe it is a whole class, or maybe it is a whole school and you really want to support them as visual supports for the whole school. But have that in your head as we go through that. It really helps kind of solidify some of the strategies and hopefully you'll be able to then take back and take out of this webinar a few strategies. So with this approach. All right, so think about this toolbox. As your toolbox also as we go through this webinar. I've embedded a lot of visual supports into this webinar. And so I'm sure you'll see them as we go through. So definitely I have this icon down at the bottom. So it's a tool that you can add to your toolbox. It's just another piece, another visual support for you to be able to utilize to think, okay, I need to cue into this. This is important information. So strategy also that we can use with our students. So I will stop for a few. I see that comments come in and I can't really see them. So I'm going to just ask Sue, like if you see a comment that I need to pay attention to, if you wouldn't mind just chirping in and letting me know, and I'm happy to answer them as we go through the webinar. So here we are. So we're going to be looking at the different strategies. But like I said, we've embedded them in, and I'm also embedded these paw prints down at the bottom. I like to use this, and you've seen books and different things use this. What is the mitten? It uses this to kind of prepare as to what's happening on the next page, right? It's kind of counting down what is happening and how we get to the end. Sometimes for some students, just knowing and predicting is very helpful. So I've embedded these pieces. So really kind of use our visual processing, right, when throughout this webinar to really see how these things are embedded. And then also maybe how could you embed one of these strategies into and add to your toolbox. All right, so our learning objectives, so understanding the how and the what and the why of using visual supports. And in visual supports are really, I mean, when is the first time I saw Boardmaker? When it was my first classroom back in Wisconsin, back in the early 90s. And I really needed to have some communication tools for some of my students. And I remember just kind of asking away, can I get some things? And I was going through magazines and cutting out pictures. And then I see this book and it's like the light shone on it. And I was like, oh, and there's a Boardmaker book with like pictures that I could take and copy off and then cut out and laminate. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. So we've been using visual supports. We've been having tools to use visual supports for quite a while. So these aren't new, but what we find is that sometimes we put this visual support in as the IEP, and then the students don't have anything. Or I know what happens often is that we implement a visual support and the student only uses it, and we spent like hours creating it, right? And the student uses it once and then they never use it again, and then that can just be disheartening. So there's lots of barriers and perceptions about the use of visual supports. However, we know through the research that it is a very highly effective strategy and implementing for all learners, because we all use that, and we're going to get into that more. So these learning objectives, so using these visuals and pictures to support implementation, an action plan, and hopefully you can name 2 behavioral visual supports you can use in your virtual teaching as well. Okay. So before we begin, as we continue, maybe I should say, so as we continue, I want to make sure we talk about this idea of presuming competence. If you've been in any of my webinars before, you know that I talk about this. And one of my colleagues, Mike Kippel, who's an AAC user, we have made a pact to always talk about this presumed potential or presumed competence. So where we need to have that, it doesn't mean that we presume that the students know. Just because they don't know doesn't mean that they can't know how. So really this idea of presuming competence, or really this, moving on to presuming potential, is very important in understanding why our students aren't able to do what they're doing. It's not because they can't, it's because maybe they don't know. And so teaching them and presuming that potential for them, having that positivity towards that. So who can use visual supports? So it's for all students. I was just I say this all the time, and it was really nice to have another presenter I was listening to say this, kind of confirm this message that, we all use visual supports in our daily life. You're driving. I often talk about, in the small community that I live in Quilcene, Washington, there's, we don't have stoplights, but we have stop signs. And, we have some elderly folk that have lived there their whole life. And I am still very thankful. And I know that they don't need to have the visual of the stop sign, but I am super thankful that it is still there to remind us that it's them. They have stopped at this stop sign their whole lives a million times, but it is still important that we have these visual supports that are constant in our life to help us. So It's not just our students that need them. Our students and kids with challenges or with challenging behaviors, our students who are nonverbal. I think sometimes we forget that while they have their AAC device, they really don't need anything else. And that's not true. That's not true at all. They also require visual supports to assist them in their learning, along with learning their AAC. So really, as all humans, we use visual supports. And you walk into, I mean, just walk into a general education classroom and you will see lots of examples of your general education teachers using visual supports in a meaningful way to engage their learners. So it's really looking at all students. And when you think about that, I'm going to just move this bar. I'm not sure if it's like grayed out on for you. Is more of this idea of this UDL, right? So the what, the representation, the how of learning and the why of learning. So having these visual supports are really important. And, I was working and talking with my husband, who's a superintendent of schools, and we were discussing about how this idea of multiple means of representation and how really their school action plan and putting that into place. And I look all over the campus and it's very, very wordy. And I'm like, if you put this into a visual and had a visual support of each of these actions, then when you're talking about that, that may have a more of an impact. People are going to have that image. They're going to know exactly when you're talking about communication, because it draws them in. So really this idea, this UDL, where it is good for all students and building those supports for your whole classroom, and what that looks like, right? So if you want to know more about universal design of learning, please check that out. CAS website has a lot of information on that, and so does SETC, and I know they've done book studies in the past, so check those out. So when it comes to visual supports, and in the previous slide, I talked about individuals and students with challenging behaviors. And we really, and I had a lot of slides with this that I was in the last presentation, and I took them out, but I did leave this one in because I think it's just a really important reminder of how we need to build these relationships. And sometimes using tools as visual supports can help with that. Help us slow down, help us to seek first to understand, have respect, have kindness, being able to use positive words for those positive outcomes. I mean, this is all reasons why we want to use these visual supports and to help our students. And just remembering, this is just so important to me, that it's our job. It's our job as teachers and therapists and paraprofessionals and parents to figure out how to teach our children, right? It is not our child's job to figure out how to learn or how we teach. And I think sometimes, so often, that can happen. And when you can give some clear, concise, visual supports to help with that, that sometimes can kind of bridge that gap and helping in that student learning within the classroom. But building those relationships it's really key, especially now in COVID. And how do you build those relationships when you're online and having that time? And it can be hard, but there are lots of resources out there. Now that we've been doing this for close to 10 months, we have a lot of information on how to build these relationships in an online community and online space. So I encourage you to take and look for that information as well. But we have lots to get through when it just comes to visual support, so we won't dive into that. So the why of visual supports. So really, there's so many reasons why. And the next slide will kind of go through the 9 reasons to use visual supports. But oftentimes our learners are, visual learners. Are they kinesthetic? Are they auditory learners? Like really understanding what learners we have in our space, and then really working towards those strengths. And oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, individuals that are on the ASD spectrum, autism spectrum, have those visual strengths and are visual learners. So it is something that we can use and start with their strengths instead of starting with a weakness in being able to support them. Language is fleeting, right? So to help to move a child, when I talk about this metacognitive awareness from being able to talk about what they're doing, because the language and the concepts don't disappear. So if you have that visual support when you're doing some writing and you have the visual support there for them of what they're writing about, or maybe sentence strips that have those visual pieces in there, or sentence starters, the language doesn't disappear and it doesn't go away. It stays right there. And that's a really important tool. And what comes in is when, especially like when a student is really struggling and like, oh, well, I introduced this visual support. They really don't need it anymore. And it is good to have that. And I kind of balk at that because I think it's good to have those visual supports around, because when they do need that, then they'll know how to use it. And it's important that they have access to that. So I wouldn't, toss them out or move them away, but still have them available. Right. And then again, back to that presumed knowledge. And we don't want to assume that they know. I know oftentimes when I taught, as an example, one of the classes that I taught one year living overseas, I taught kindergarten, and I thought I was going to pull my hair out, the first 6 weeks of class. Like this 5-year-olds drove me nuts. And, by the end of October, so in love with them, and they were the best class ever. But those first few weeks are all about teaching them those rules and procedures, and we would use visual supports to get through that, and practicing those, like all that good teaching. And what would happen is they would get it, they would know it, and we'd go on a break and they'd come back and things would fall apart. And I'm like, you guys know how to do this. I was assuming that they did. And that was wrong. I had to go back and reteach. And it was often when I work with teams and stuff, and teachers to say, if you hear yourself saying, well, you know how to do this, just I showed you how to do this, why aren't you doing this? Then if you hear yourself saying that over and over again, it's likely because they don't know how to do that, and you need to go back and reteach. So really understanding this presumed knowledge, assuming that they don't know, really this idea of then practicing that skill in isolation, then practicing it in the real world. If it needs to take a break for a while because they don't need it, that's great, but making sure they have access to it again. So looking at these 9 reasons, sorry, I'm going to move this up again here. So the 9 reasons to use visual supports. I love this. I adapted this from this K Wines that I found. And so this was really, I have this up all over our school, all over. And that we talked about this a little bit, like visuals are permanent, as spoken words, they disappear. Visuals help kids see what you mean. And so that is really important that they can see that if you have a visual learner, that they really can key into those key details. So visuals are transferable between environments and people, right? So it's pretty apparent that this is a picture of school and there's a picture of home. Of course, you get into core words and those are harder to represent in a visual space, but our nouns and, people, places, and things, those things are much easier to represent in a picture format. And so visuals, let's go up to the top. Visuals allow time for language processing. This is another huge piece. I think that I know as a teacher, I speak way too fast, and I have a lot that I need to get in and a lot that needs to come through. When I'm working with using visuals, when I'm teaching individuals that are using AAC, I have found that I have really needed, and what helps me slow down so that they can have time for that processing, that those visual supports allow for that, or can allow for that. Visual supports help all students. I put that in the middle because all these things are good for all students. And I love this. The visual supports have no attitude. They really don't, right? It's a no picture's a no picture. A stop sign's a stop sign. Go is go. There's no attitude, there's no tone, there's no frustration, there's no disapproval. And sometimes when we're frustrated in our work, that can come out. And so it's really important to be able to have something that we can use when we're having those moments, when we need to take a break as well. Visuals prepare students for those transitions, those first thens that everyone is so familiar with and that we use and work really well. I love using visual supports and first then on the fly. I think it's really important to have those in your space so that kids can predict and be ready. Visual supports help build independence, right? So as and where you're going through and what we're talking about here is that continuum of supports and prompting. So which we know that those visual prompts are usually much at the higher level as far as the least impactful are prompts, and that they're leading towards independence. And then also that really is coming around is that these visual supports can really help reduce that anxiety by not disappearing, by giving processing time, by allowing for transitions, by being visual so they can see them, that they're transferable, no attitude, can really help reduce the anxiety of all of their daily lives or not understanding what they need to do. So really so many reasons to use this. I've shared my slide. Please print out and give to and put on in your rooms. I think it's a really great reminder and a visual support for us as adults. I have lots of visual supports around in my classrooms and around our school for not just our students, but for our adults who work with our students. So what are visual supports? So visual supports are any type of representation, right, that are represented visually that have attached meaning, right? So we know that in our environment, we have signs that we use for road signs, for driving, right? We wouldn't want to come to a stop sign and have a paragraph of what you need to do, right? It needs to be something that is quick and easy and that we know exactly its meaning and exactly what the behavior that needs to happen with that. So, which also, and we'll talk about this, needs to be taught. We can't just hand kids visual supports and then say, oh, look, it didn't work. See, that didn't work. We have to teach them, just like with all assistive technology. We can write assistive technology into IEPs. And if you've joined and have been with me in webinars where I talk about writing AT in the IEPs, in the places that you put that, we put these pieces in, but we still have to teach. We have to be able to provide those supports. We just can't put in this piece or this tool and then walk away and say, I've done my job. We haven't taught them how to use that. So visual supports also come in timers, checklists, calendars. I love the directions. If anybody has built anything from IKEA, you know that I've built things from there that don't even have words on them. It's all pictures. It's all picture supported of what to do in the order and the sequence. So visual supports come in and allow us to be able to look at them, find the information, do the behavior, and attach that very quickly. One of the things that I think sometimes, and I don't know if I talk about this later, I'm not really sure, but I don't think I do, is this idea of adding symbolic symbols to writing. Back in the day, we used to do this. There's a lot of research out there right now that kind of talks about putting symbolic symbols and pictures in Boardmaker has it, the Symbol It tool, with their writing. And what we're seeing, and that's being very discouraged because it has shown to decrease students that have disabilities, their ability to read, and can get in the way. So visual supports shouldn't be used when you're writing paragraphs of words. Like these words and these picture symbols, having them in that sense shouldn't be used. However, if there is a word that you're working on or a fringe vocabulary that are in there and you want to bring attention to that and you bring in a visual representation of that, I think that is okay. Right? It should be one thing that's very quick and has meaning, and that you contribute that meaning and use that behavior. So it shouldn't be, though, like I said, using that symbolic tool that we're seeing. That I know the unique system that we use in our district, that it has that as well, that you can add the symbol to the text. And when it comes to reading, that's what we're seeing is that is not a supportive measure for use of symbols and pictures. Okay. Here, earlier I said, go into any elementary classroom and you are going to see visual supports. So I loved these pictures that I just found online. I've used this in my teaching when I taught gen ed, or when I've had my own classroom and a self-contained classroom kind of way back in the day in early childhood. So used a lot of these. And, we know that there are pieces here that we can learn from, right? The color, the highlighting, the pictures, having that information, using these tools. So these are anchor charts, posters, things like that. I love this idea, and we're starting to use that now with our students, kind of this transition with utilizing for some things these visual scenes. So using these visual scenes as visual supports, or was in a training yesterday where we were talking about ABA methods and prompting, and looking at that prompt hierarchy and how you fade prompts. And we were talking about how we're using video modeling as a strategy for one of our students, and how we were going to fade that. And she really talked about how, and in that instance, that could be considered a visual support in utilizing and helping them make that transition. So this idea of and using these visual supports within visual scenes, I just feel is just a really, really untapped piece out there. And I think that you'll see a lot of this. If you've ever been on a boom card, you'll see quite a few visual supports that are brought into boom cards, that if you're working on different language or different specific core words, especially. So check them out if you haven't used boom cards. It's a great tool to use virtually, especially if your students have something other than a Chromebook that they're using, and you can give over the mouse to them so they can take that remote control and be able to interact on your screen. If they don't, what I have found that works is I have my students bring up the boom card on their computer and have them share their screen. I can still see their face. They can still see my face. They still share their video, and then I can see them interacting, and we can do that together. That's a really great tool, a way to get around the whole Chromebook snafu with Zoom. So, okay. We use visual scenes for lots of different activities within our classroom, and for some students, especially making that transition from a visual scene to more of an icon-based communication system. So we'll use this as well, these visual scenes, for that, which has been so far super successful. We had a great session today. I was super excited about it. I like to use dynamic visual supports. I hate laminating. It's one of my least favorite things in the world to do. So this is why when I actually print, I print on water, that kind of non-tearable TerraSlate water paper that you can't tear it. You can wash it. You print it on a laser printer. It is expensive, but then I don't have to mess with it. So for me, it's just worth the time that I can just print and go. And it can be, and it's waterproof and non-tearable. So it's you can find them on Amazon, the TerraSlate paper. And anyway, so I don't like to do this. Plus, it takes a lot of time to make these type of supports. So and sometimes things change, especially with utilizing schedules. Our schedules change throughout the day. So what does that look like? So I like to push out visual supports. We have a Boardmaker account here in our district. I will create visual calendars and visual supports for my students, and they can go in, they talk at the beginning of the day with their paraeducators or with their teachers or with their peers about what their day is going to look like. And this is the one I use for kindergarten, where it really only has 5 steps, and then we repeat or we start over. Or I create for the afternoon, so there's not too much isn't going on at that time, depending on your students' needs. Some are more complicated, but I really love that idea of being able to push it out, or, hey, we're reducing their need for this. So I now, instead of the task analyzing every small step that they need to do, I can now go into bigger chunks. Okay, well, I'm not having to reprint and laminate or make these materials. I can just make some quick adjustments and push that out to my student, and it goes to their Chromebook, or it goes to their iPad, or it goes to their computer, whatever they have. So this has been a real lifesaver for me as far as using visual supports. What I also love about this is that, again, I can push these out to them. And when we're in the virtual setting, I can ask them, like, hey, let's go open up your Boardmaker account and let's talk about your schedule today. What does that look like at home? How is that different than what we do at school? So and then they share, so when they pull that up, they share their screen, and then we're able to interact, and I can watch them, how they are interacting with that. It was very cool the other day. I was online teaching virtually I had 2 kiddos at home and 1 here in the classroom, and we were working and doing this dance, teaching virtually and teaching in person at the same time. And one of my students were working on, and I'm sure many of you have done that, right? The point where you're working on isolating that finger, isolating that point. And we're also working on it for her to be soft. So doing a soft touch when she comes to the computer or on her AAC device. Excuse me. And one of the things that I could see as she was doing that is I could really see her coming into the screen with her hand. And when she was coming here, I could say, oh, help me, go into a pointer, show me pointer, soft touch. And that was actually pretty cool to see, where when I am either sitting next to her or beside her, there's just so much going on. It was nice to really see what she was doing, and I could kind of give her her learning partner that's at home a few tips on how to help her and cue her to be able to do that. So really great way to use the visual supports and have them even in a virtual setting. We start with this every day in a virtual setting. We talk about and look at our executive functioning and how we plan our day, utilizing all of these. We use books and Boardmaker. There's lots of activities that can support that in using different supports. So I encourage you to take a look if you have Boardmaker, and seeing that it's more than just a print-based program. If you have Boardmaker Online, which is going to be moving to Boardmaker 7 here soon. And I'm very excited to see what that brings. So okay, so how to make visual supports. We're doing okay here on time. So you really kind of need to think about looking at what do you need. So looking at the properties, I went through some of this research and looked at like what makes a really good visual support, what piece comes into to helping students. Of course, your students are, they're always going to be some individual, your students have these individual needs in what works best for them. What we know, especially even in the AAC field, that there is no hierarchy when it comes to utilizing icons or visual representations over real objects, over, pictures of real things, that there is no hierarchy. There is no one has to master the other before you can move on to picture representation. Um, there maybe your student needs an image or a picture of their favorite toy to start out for engagement purposes. But that doesn't mean that you can't, everything that you use has to be a picture, a real picture. We can start out with other tools and other icons like board maker, PCSs, or picture communication symbols. Some people call them PECs, not to be confused with the language program of PECs, PECS, the picture exchange communication system. So make sure when you're writing that also in your IEPs, I've seen lots of IEPs that will say PECs, PCSs, meaning though that they wanted to talk about the picture exchange communication system. So making sure you really have that defined. So these properties of good visual support. So knowing that you have some individual needs and individual differences, but this is kind of the guideline, you could say. You really want things to be simple. You want to get rid of that visual clutter. Sometimes for some students on the ASD spectrum, moving away from real pictures is really helpful because there's a lot of stuff and there's a lot of clutter in the background. So what do they need to be paying attention to when it comes to that? Kids with CVI, making sure that you have very clear, concise pictures and that you have some contrast with that, right? So, but it being simple, the message being very simple on these pictures. So, color or black and white, depending on what, sometimes it just depends on what you have access to. What can you print out? And do you have access to a color printer? Can you only print in black and white? And if you can, excuse me, only print in black and white, I would rather have black and white pictures and visual supports than nothing at all. So it doesn't need to be in color. But if you feel like you need some color on there, then, when I've had restrictions on me as far as color printing, I've taken out the Crayola markers and I've put some color in, and that works just as easy. You want to make sure you have, how is your system set up when you go through? Is it linear or is it vertical or horizontal? Which version are you doing and for what? One of the moms that I worked with very closely, Megan, I've presented with her in the past as well for Closing the Gap, and she has 2 boys with that are on the autism spectrum. And we talked about this a lot. And she's like, well, which way do I do like the visual support when I'm cooking with them or when we're doing something in the bathroom? So which way? And I said, really I think the good rule of thumb is that if it's a checklist, that typically goes vertical, right? If it's anything that would be a sequence of events that you would put in order. I tend to then go horizontal, just like you would read. So you read from left to right, and that can help that and be in a tool that's already just embedded that looking from left to right, that scanning from left to right and going there can be really important. So that's I'm sure others have a better way of maybe a different way of going about that, but that's just kind of the rule of thumb that I use. So if it's more of a checklist of things, we go vertical, a schedule of sorts, we go vertical. If it's more of a sequence of events that need to be occurring, like brushing the teeth or washing the hands, I tend to go horizontal to encourage, again, those pre-reading skills. So clean, I had a professor in college who I didn't get along with very well, and actually was about to give me my first real bad grade. And what I learned from her is that, if you are not going to create materials that you wouldn't want to look at, then don't give them to students. So if they're not clean or visually appealing, they're not, we don't have a nice crisp border, they're not cut out appropriately, that if you wouldn't want to hold on to them or look at them, then why would we do that for our students? So making sure that they're clean and visually appealing, and the cutting thing just leads, it's a funny story. I had an OT that I worked with back in Wisconsin. She was the worst cutter ever. Like, she could not cut on a straight line, and she would bring me all of her stuff. She's like, I know I teach this, but I'm just not good at it. So, so knowing your strengths is also a good thing. So having those things clean, visual appealing. Remember, these are visual supports. So a picture, like one per word. We're not having a dissertation on a visual support. When you look at a stop sign, it's just, sometimes there's no words. Sometimes it's just stop. So words less is more. Also making things with positive language. Where's my tools? Want to find here it is. Okay. So we have, all my teachers have, and all my paras have our lanyards. So we have positive support. So right here I have, so eyes on teacher. So that tells me that you're showing readiness. Your hands to self. Now I could say, like no hitting, right? But no hitting is has negative language. Instead, I'm telling or showing what the behavior that needs to be, hands to self. So being positive. Instead of saying no running, I'm saying walking feet. So I'm using that positive language. Walking feet shows me that you are having some self-control. These are really nice to have quick on the fly, your first then. So great visual supports. Maybe you just need to wait. Maybe you need to stop. Maybe we can go. So having some things that you can use on the fly is always really important. So pre-made, this would be like a pre-made thing that I've created for all of my paras. Here's another pre-made. We use the alternative pencil here, and we do it in the QWERTY format because many of our students are transitioning and using their Chromebooks. So we put it in the QWERTY format, and then we can go through and we can then scan these words, the letters, when we're using the alternative pencil. And, here then are the visual supports. Do we need to turn the page? Do you need to space more, or all done? And on this, and I have it so that it sits like this on the table, which is, for us, it's really handy because we have a lot of things that we're having to deal with and move around. And so if it's laying flat, we found that wasn't working out so well. And then we also have some things here. So, what are we going to write with? And they get to choose their writing utensil. What color do you want to use? All right, are you ready? Are we finished choosing our color? Great, let's go on and start doing some writing. So alternative pencil, I know there's been webinars on it. It's a really, really powerful tool for individuals with significant disabilities in teaching the process of writing. So I encourage you to take a look on that. So these pre-made things are going to be a constant in their environment, things that we use all the time, things that are going to stay the same. I make them. And again, I use that TerraSlate paper so that I can wash this. I can spray disinfectant on it. It can go in the shower if it needed to. Like, it's indestructible. It's really great stuff. And I don't have to laminate, which is always good for me. So different types of visual supports that I've made that are more of kind of this UDL that we have. So this listen and do, we utilize those words as a cue to draw and bring attention back. First thens, I use those. I have them printed and pre-made, but then we write in there, and I do laminate those so that we can dry erase on top. And then so that we can put the steps in there if we need, or we can quick draw it out. Having to go through and search for a icon or a picture symbol for first, and then we're going to do this for me, that's too much, unless there are some pretty common ones that you use all the time. I have had some positive oh, and I should have brought that out. Sorry. I have some positive visual books for individual students that would have if they're on a token economy system, then they have their tokens in there. It would have their break was in there. It would have the different things they're working for. It would have a first then of the items that they could choose. So things that were constant and we used all the time, then I would print those out. But if I like to have things that I can just use on the fly. We do also, I would make things in my last district I worked in, we used the Go Math. And so it was very often in kindergarten, the same steps that they had to go through. And so we made these as bookmarks, or we put them in there on a long page sorry, let me start again. On a horizontal page, normal page, put this on the right-hand side, and it would stick in their workbook. So that way it got them to the right page every time, and then it was the directions that they needed. So it was super handy for them to use. It was something that they used every day. So we talked a little bit about this earlier. So we can't just hand a student a visual support like a break card and then be surprised when it doesn't work. We need to teach. We need to teach how to use the visual support. So in this, we're teaching self-regulation, we're teaching calming strategies, and we're teaching how to take a break. So we need to teach the meaning of the symbols, of what that means to our students. We can't assume that they have the knowledge of what those mean, even though they look pretty, like we can tell. We can't assume that they know. We can presume the competence, but we can't assume that they know the information. So really teaching that meaning to the symbol, and then understanding and doing good teaching, right? This gradual release of responsibility. So you teach it, you do it together, you practice in groups, you independent, you repeat, and that it is a dynamic process, right? And that you can also use for formative assessments at some point. So really the how of using visual supports, if we forget the teaching part, it's going to fail, right? We do everything we can in creating the best visual support and with all of those techniques, but we still need to teach it. And we need to teach how to use it. We need to model that teaching. We need to model how to use it. We need to reinforce how to use that. Maybe we even with some students need to prompt them and go through a prompting hierarchy on how to utilize those visual supports. So more of these ideas of how to teach, really kind of, I have I have one student who, when things aren't going well, we're gonna stop and we're gonna come back and try again in a minute. We're gonna take a break, and I bet you that we're gonna do better next time, and that's okay. That's okay. Maybe I'm just having a moment, and I just need to take a little bit of break. Um, we would say try again tomorrow, but here we are I'm in an AB day. I won't see them for a few days. So we try to bring that back again as quickly as possible. Of course, we do scaffolding, we review. We can't, it's just not one and done just because we taught it one day. Just because I taught my kindergartners how to walk in line in September doesn't mean that they remember how to do that again in January when they come back from break. So we need to review, we need to practice. And then making sure that your reinforcements are correct, right? At my training yesterday, which I thought was just really great, we talked about prompting, and we also talked about feeding those prompts, and then also the reinforcement and feeding those reinforcements. So really making sure that we have those in place and figuring out where that breakdown is happening if those visual supports aren't being the support that they need. And then that idea of that metacognitive teaching. So that talking about what you do and why you do, when you did this, it tells me this. So having some of those behavioral supports kind of mixed in. So really it's that how of teaching. So here's some visual supports. We're coming to the end. I want to give some time if there are any questions. Some quick visual supports I have up and around. Again, I talk too much. Of course, in a webinar, I'm going to be talking the whole time, which this is why I love doing webinars, because I get to talk a lot. So this 2 and 10 till you talk to 10, talk again, 2 and 10 to comprehend. Giving visual supports, not for our students, but for our support staff. And for me, these just help me. They are the stop sign I need to slow down. Again, going back to our 9 reasons to use those visuals, and we've talked a lot about them, but they really, again, to the center that visuals can help all students. They are not going to impede a student's learning. They are going to help all students, and students use what they need, right? They go and they gravitate towards the pieces that they need. Really, I encourage you to use this and show this to your staff, show it to your principals, show it to your superintendents. Like, this is really good information for all people to utilize. And then visuals. So I love this one. My students understand everything I say. Should I still use visuals? Yes, but in purple. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time. And then if there are any questions, I'm just going to look at the chat here if I can. I think I have to stop my share and go to the chat. Okay, it looks like the chat was just looking for the handouts. But if anybody has any questions, I'm here and can help you guys process or work through anything if you need. Let's see here. What else do I have? Oh, I did want to show you this visual support. I just got a 3D printer and I'm super excited to get started on that again. So I used, and I know it's red, but tactile visual supports. I think we can't forget about our low vision individuals and what they need. These are from the core learning project. Through Karen Erickson out of South Carolina. And you can go look, if you just Google like core project, they have these tactile communication supports there. So they're very great. Someone said, what prompts reminders do you suggest for blind vision impaired students? So I didn't read that before I wanted to show you that. This is so my low vision students, and we will use this, even my kids that aren't low vision, but need something to hold on to even just transition from one place to another. So sometimes it's just taking the go symbol and we're just gonna go. It's time for us to go. And then I have others, but this one I keep on, and I keep it on me because it's a positive one, and so when I come to a situation that is maybe a little sticky, I'm like, maybe we need to go. Maybe we need to go someplace else. Why don't we take a break and go? And so this has been helpful in having it. I just take it off and I give it to them, and here, you take this, and we're gonna go. And something that's just all they need as a transition. So let's see here. Good. So I have, yes, we're trialing that now. I'm not sure how that is trialing. I'm not really sure what that refers to. So, okay, well, everyone, if I have any other visual supports, I did want to show you one more thing. One of the things that we do, our students, I've created a binder, sorry about that, for all of our students, and they have their communication. We have 4 different types of communication systems that are represented by students in our class. And so when we are working on core words, we make sure that we work on core words with their own communication symbols. All of our paras then have always a first then on the fly that they can use. Also a listen and do. They have a quick, oops, upside down, a quick checklist. So this one is the ELA checklist that they can just write on here and with a dry erase, and then kids can then check it off when they're done. And then also a math checklist. So, and then important for depending on the student, if we're at a stop, think, do, where we can have a discussion, or if we're just in a listen and do. So all of our teachers have that. We kind of have, I call it our UDL visual pack, and everybody has access to that. And every classroom for every teacher in my building also has those printed out, so that everybody is prepared for using visual supports to have them. Because if you don't have them, then you can't use them. So I have you used it with students, the 3D device? If so, any feedback on how it's going? Just wondering. So I have used the 3D printer with students, but not with them working with it. When it is going, it's in a safe zone. Like I said, I just got it. So and so it is in safe zone because of it's hot, and we can only look, not touch at that point. So we also do, we'll go, and if we're working on a concept, and then we will go and search for someone that has already created the file. And then we will take that file, and then we will see it printed. And so then we do a lot of writing around it. We do a lot of drawing around that, those activities that we do. So I'm excited. I did this in my last district. I'm super excited to bring it back. I also used it for kids as a reward. So if they were in some sort of token economy, we would look up what they were interested in. We would talk a little bit about what 3D printing looked like and what that meant, and they could do some searching. And then we would then print that for them as their reward at the end of the week for doing what they need to be doing. So. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. The 3D communication symbols. So these are all the files are on the core Word project, and you can find these 3D visual communication symbols on there, and those STL files are right there. You just you grab them, you download them, and you put them into your software, your 3D printing software, so that it splices it, and then it's ready to go. So, and then you can print them. Obviously I probably should have printed this on green because it's Go, but I think it was the only filament I had was red left. So I just did what I could. Project Core 3D symbol limited to about 13 symbols. It is. Yep, it is. But there's some good ones, you know. I mean, there's some pretty core ones that we use and some core words, which is really nice to have in a tactile way, because sometimes those core can be really tough to teach as well. And the visual representations change from system to system as well, whether you're using a PRC or Tobii Dynavox or Sotella, like things just change. Well, great. Well, thanks everyone. We're a minute over time. I really appreciate the comments. I appreciate you spending your time with me, especially in the time of COVID. I know that you're having to sit on a computer probably all day, and then having another hour is just like, that has to be painful. So I hope you learned something. If you need anything, please reach out to me at shredman@communicationspaces.com, and happy to answer any of your questions. So have a great weekend, and have a great November, and thanks everyone.
Thanks, Sharon. Looks like they're just dropping off as they hang up. Went great.
Great. Good.
Great.
Yeah. It helps that I've presented this a couple times, so it all kind of comes flooding back after a while after you get